The Pat Campbell Show.
I've been trying for a couple days now to get on the program Daniel Horowitz, who writes on a regular basis for Eric Erickson's Red State. He had an excellent article up there about the GOP, and, you know, one faction has the plan to defund Obamacare, and then we've got people like our own Tom Coburn out there who are adamantly opposed to it, and Tom's pitching this idea that, no, we wait for the debt ceiling, and that's when we play gotcha, which I think is insane because it could even be worse than a government shutdown, which I guess would be the worst-case scenario with defunding Obamacare, if the president wants to go that route, because with Coburn's plan, it could actually put us over the fiscal cliff, causing us to default. Here to talk about it and what's going on with within the Republican Party is Daniel Horowitz. Daniel, welcome to the Pat Campbell Show.
Great to be with you, Pat, in the land of Jim Bridenstine.
There you go. Yeah, that's the guy that hopefully someday, not too soon or not too far away, we can start calling Senator Jim Bridenstine. Where do I want to begin with this? Let me tell you a little story on Coburn, okay? Coburn's people called me about a week ago because he was making the round doing the town hall meetings, and he wanted to come on the show. And I said, sure. I said, contingent upon him coming on with, I said, my friend, Eric Erickson from Red State. I said, because we're going to lay this whole thing to rest once and for all. We're going to talk about whether or not you can actually defund Obamacare, because Eric says you can, Bridenstine says you can, the Heritage Foundation came out with a point-by-point, plan, and yet Tom Coburn says you can't. So let's hash this out once and for all right on my program. So I heard back from his people. They said that the senator would like to come in studio with me this week, and then maybe next week we can revisit the blogger idea. Okay, so in other words, he's ducking Erickson, and I really detest the way he's being dismissive of Eric. He's just a blogger, because it was Eric very early on back in I think 2004 when Coburn first ran for the Senate. This was one of the first candidates Eric Erickson really got behind and supported. So much for loyalty, huh? So tell me what's going on here specifically with Coburn. What do you know?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, the thing with Coburn is he's been in Washington for, I guess too long. I'm glad he pledged 2 terms. It seems like there's something in the water or the air there that once you're there for too long, you start buying into the Washington rules. Now, as you just pointed out, there is no sane explanation to say you're not going to fight on the budget bill, the CR, but you will fight on the debt ceiling. Mm-hmm. And, what's important to mention here, and this really harkens back to your own Congressman, Jim Bridenstine, earlier this year in January, House Republicans met in Williamsburg, Virginia, a little retreat, and they all had rah-rah get-together. And at that time, we had the debt ceiling coming down the pike and another CR budget deadline in March, and conservatives wanted to fight Obamacare then.
Right.
In fact, they wanted to fight Obamacare about 5-6 other times since taking back the House in 2011. Mm-hmm. The world did not begin this month. This is about the 7th, 8th time, and every time they say, no, we can't do it now, it's going to be the next CR. And then you get to that and they say, no, it's the next debt ceiling. No, the next CR. Well, at some point you step back and realize this is not a matter of meekness. Mm. It's a matter of malice. They do not want to do it. They want to work around the Republican base. Mm-hmm. And as you pointed out, logically, we all agree that there's no reason we should have to default when you hit the debt ceiling. You could pay the interest on the debt, you could pay the military and Social Security, and then you have a forced balanced budget until we get our fiscal house in order. But nonetheless, that is the perception out there. So if you're too scared to fight on a budget bill, which just has the specter of a run-of-the-mill government shutdown for EPA or Department of Commerce bureaucrats, it's non-essential employees, you certainly will never have the courage to fight on a debt ceiling.
You mentioned in the article the Republicans in Washington are not just dumb or spineless. They are the problem. And again, communicating with Coburn's people, they really, I think they're so entrenched inside the Beltway. They're in a protective cocoon or bubble. They don't get it. I said, you don't understand. I said, this is a tipping point. And I mean this for me personally. This is a tipping point. What the Republicans do in the next couple of weeks is going to decide the fate of their party. the people inside D.C. do not understand. I think Coburn was getting a taste when he came back home at some of these town hall meetings. They don't understand how real this is. You promised us that you would repeal Obamacare. I get it. You can't do that because you don't have control of the Senate. Okay, but now you've got a chance to defund it. And what are you going to do? You're going to punt like you've punted before. And that just isn't going to cut it with the American people. They think that we're almost like blacks with the Democratic Party. We don't have anywhere else to go, so we're going to stick with them. We'll be good little lemmings, and we'll follow them over the cliff. That's what they think is going to happen. And I think they're in for a very, very rude awakening.
Oh, they certainly are. And, there's a very powerful observation between the two parties. The Democrats use the August recess to harness their base to fight for liberal policies. The Republicans use the August recess to make an end run around the base, and instead of uniting to fight Obamacare, they're actually blocking the fight on Obamacare so they could free up the schedule to pass amnesty and score points for Obama. It makes no sense. That's why people always say you have the evil party in the Democrats and the stupid party in Republicans. They're just dumb, lack of spine, lack of courage. You can't possibly be that dumb. They're doing it on purpose. They're part of the permanent political class.
Right.
And they're ashamed of us. They're ashamed of us with the amnesty fight. They're ashamed of us with Obamacare. They're ashamed of us for our views of constitutional Republican government. And look, they want to get a new base. I don't know where they're going to get the new base from, but they're ashamed of us.
Now, earlier this week, you sent me that commercial that I think your PAC is running against Mitch McConnell. Now, tell me a little bit about the PAC and why you've targeted him. By the way, I refer to him as Mrs. Doubtfire on my program.
Well, exactly. I mean, as you mentioned, we're at a tipping point. I used to be like everyone else when I was a tadpole in politics. 2004, wow, Republicans took back the House, the Senate. They won the presidency 2004. This is great. And then as I got older and I realized, wait a minute, we're not getting anywhere. For every 100 yards the Democrats gain when they're in power, when we're in power, we might be lucky to slow down their running play by a yard or two. And that's how we've had a century of progressivism, harkening back to Wilson or FDR, and we're losing this. So we're not going to change the game unless we completely change the Republican leadership. And someone stepped forward in Kentucky to challenge the most powerful Republican who is fighting against the defund Obamacare effort. He's pressuring fellow senators not to join, but he's using people like Coburn and some others to do his bidding. An interesting aside about McConnell. He's the epitome of the GOP establishment. Karl Rove, Republican, former chief of staff. Steve Law is Karl Rove's associate. All the NRSC guys, the senatorial committee, they're all run by, McConnell alumni. But he does differ from the other members of leadership in one respect.
What's that?
As much as the Tea Party kind of uses Boehner as a punching bag and, oh boy, he's just, he's selling us out, I do give John Boehner credit for being honest. He will stand up before his conference and say, hey, guys, you know what? We can't do this. We're not going to shut the government down. We don't want to default. This is the deal we have to cut. And something interesting, traditionally a speaker does not have to cast a vote, but he will go down to the well of the House and cast a vote for things that are really unpopular with conservatives. So to that extent, I give him credit. McConnell sits in the background, cuts the deal. If people don't realize that the debt ceiling deal and the tax cliff deal this year were both cut by McConnell with Biden, not John Boehner. But he's very quiet about it. He'll often praise the amnesty bill, but he'll vote against it in the end in order, so the Hicks back home, in his home state, that's how they view them, won't come with pitchforks against him. But that's the thing. He is trying to make an end run around the conservative base, and we realize that we are not going to change the Republic unless we change the Republican Party.
Back to Bridenstine. You brought him up a few minutes ago. Last time I had him on the program, he told me point blank, he says, I don't think the leadership's even going to let this defund Obamacare get to the floor of the House for a vote. Is he right?
Absolutely, because were it to get to the floor, there would be a full rebellion, and that's something they cannot deal with. Look, Jim was ahead of the game. during the whole Williamsburg thing at the beginning of the year, when they said, hey, let's suspend the debt ceiling law, let's pass SDR funding Obamacare, but let me tell you, the next time we'll unify behind the House budget, and then we'll fight on the next debt ceiling. Mm-hmm. Obviously we knew 10 times later it's not going to happen. He knew that right away. He gets it. He's someone who campaigned on that promise and is actually delivering.
Yeah. Speaking of Bridenstine, too, I don't know how aware you are of this, but there's a couple of names that are being bandied about, pretty prominent names that plan on challenging him, after his first term here. And this I'm talking about challenges from within the Republican Party, but by candidates who are more of that Mitch McConnell mode, if you know what I mean, candidates who are in bed locally with the chamber here in town. And it's a shame because this guy has done Oklahoma proud.
He has done us all proud everywhere around the country. And look, I'll break this news to you, in Tulsa right now. Were that to happen, we usually don't endorse incumbents. We try to get challengers in. But this is one exception where this is a man who is the same person he was on the campaign trail, right. Possibly even better. He's delivered on every one of his promises. We will come in and absolutely defend him, and I can guarantee you other conservative organizations will do so as well.
Mm-hmm. Here in Oklahoma, we've got two of the most conservative senators in the country, and yet they're at odds on this issue. Inhofe, and I don't know if it's because it's an election year or not, but Inhofe's on board with defunding, whereas Tom Coburn, no, he just, despite repeated calls, I've had people calling and saying, they called that number, called his office, nobody ever returned their call, they didn't get an answer. It's like he's bound and determined. He knows better than we do. That's what it is.
Unfortunately, that's the case, and with many of these people, there's a bunch of Republicans that are obviously pure frauds. A number of them are good guys. Yeah. In a perfect world, they understand limited government, they agree with us on free markets, but they're not willing to do what it takes. Ted Cruz talks about this all the time, and Jim Bridenstine is the same thing. We need to change the rules of the game. We're losing. We lost the entire 20th century. Every time the Democrats institute a program, it never gets rolled back. This is a time when we finally have to draw a line in the sand because, frankly, it's very unpopular. We're not asking to fight over Social Security.
Right.
We were never engaging brinkmanship over Medicare. But this is something that people do not want, and James Madison in Federalist 58 said that this is the last recourse to address every grievance. The power of the purse is vested in the House, which is the body closest to the people, and that is controlled by Republicans. And that Federalist paper is speaking exactly to this time.
Daniel Horowitz, if people want to find out more about you and what you do, where do we send them?
Obviously, redstate.com, where we address the legislative issues. If you're looking for conservative candidates to support all over the country in primaries, Madison